I, was able to be really personable. I asked a lot of questions about other people. I really was a good listener, but I didn't talk a lot about what was truly going on, about my romantic life or, intimacy. I could talk for days about other topics, but I kept that very hidden away. And that takes a hell of a lot of energy. You and I talk about the human condition and the human struggle and just what it means to be a person on this earth all the time, and how it's like very challenging for people, and people struggle with being vulnerable, allowing themselves to be seen, and feeling like they have to have it all together. And
nobody has it all together.
Nobody has it all together, but also like that, the idea of perfectionism.
Yeah.
And how some people take that to an extreme and really feel like they are perfectionists.
Yeah. And like holding up this facade or like shoving everything under the rug and acting like people just act like they have it all together.
Yes.
Right. And I think that's a disservice to people in general. Everybody's like, how are you? Fine. I'm good. Yeah, good. Everything's really good. But people aren't being honest with the struggle because we don't have time to go into it, or we don't want to be vulnerable, or we don't want to bog somebody down, or we don't want to talk about our stuff. But I think if people did talk about their stuff, it would normalize things for everybody who does struggle, and no one's exempt from this stuff.
It's also incredibly energy sucking for somebody to have to maintain the facade.
Yeah.
And present those two selves, the inner self and then the outer external self.
Yeah. But I think being honest and real, which is what we are going to do right now, right? Like telling your personal story, being vulnerable, saying, I don't have it all together and I've been through a lot and I've been in dark places and I've struggled, I think can really help other people see themselves in you and me, which is why we are feeling like it's important for us to be open.
Yeah, having a podcast talking about this stuff. I mean, this idea of perfectionism or feeling like you have to have it all together is so familiar to me. And I often refer to myself as like a recovering perfectionist.
You are a recovering perfectionist.
And it's funny because I think, how did I come to that? Like what's the root of all that? And part of it, I think I'm wired that way a little bit. Yeah. Because we all come into this earth with, a
set point.
A specific like wiring.
Yes.
Yeah, a set point. And, my mom will tell me stories about when I was a little kid and I was the older sister and I liked to be in charge. And I was like, oh yeah, that's definitely me. That's my wiring.
Yeah.
But also everybody has experiences that shape their lives and shape how they sort of interact in the world. And for me, through the inner work that I've done as an adult, it's been very clear that I've had some events that have shaped my tendency towards perfectionism and really that love of feeling like I have control.
We get our stuff honestly.
As Gail Hardiman Wong says.
Yes. Yes.
And I think back to when I was a little kid. When I was 7 years old, my dad was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia, which is just a very aggressive form of leukemia. And knowing what I know about medicine now, I can see that was probably a pretty grim prognosis in a diagnosis.
Yes, and you were 7.
At the time. Yeah, it was in the 80s, and treatments were not sophisticated as they are today. And he had this diagnosis. We had just moved up from Napa, California, and we had been in an apartment, and we just moved into this new house. And I remember it was new construction. We were in this new neighborhood, and we didn't even have a yard in. And here my parents are dealing with this diagnosis of AML. And he went through treatment, his first round of treatment, and went into remission. And I think we were, as a family, just getting our bearings. You know, my dad's work, I can remember my dad's office worker colleagues came over and did like a big yard party and finished the landscaping in our yard because my dad was too sick. And
do you remember your dad being sick?
Those are the things I remember. I remember the yard party. I remember the hospital. And I think as we were sort of getting our bearings and starting to get back to normal life, it's interesting, as a kid, you just kind of go with it. But on Halloween, this was probably 4 months later, he relapsed, and my parents found out on Halloween. Oh. And I think
you don't like Halloween.
I don't like Halloween.
You've never told me that that's why.
Well,
maybe it's just a feeling.
Yeah,
it's just a feeling.
I've never really connected the two, but I really don't like Halloween. And they found out that he had relapsed on Halloween, and he was immediately sent up to Seattle to have treatment because it was a better situation to be at a more modern hospital up there at the time. And so my brother and I were living with family friends during the week. And then we lived with my aunt on the weekends. And my mom was driving back and forth to Seattle while my dad was in treatment.
How long did you live with family friends and your aunt for?
Well, he was going through, so he started treatment right away. And he had chemotherapy and ended up needing a bone marrow transplant, which they did. And ultimately, his immune system was just too weak, and he got an infection, and he died in February. So it was 4 months of
you being 7 years old and your brother being 5.
Yeah, and going back and forth. And I just think about my mom, who was, how did she do that? Driving back and forth to Seattle, shuttling us around, making sure we were cared for, us trying to make sure we were going to school.
Yeah.
I just think about the strength of the women in my family who were like really lifting us up at that time. But yeah, so that was 4 months. And honestly, you asked, I don't remember a lot about my dad. It's a 7-year-old brain. I don't think I had memories of being in the cafeteria at the hospital. I have memories of babysitting a little boy whose family was also in the hospital. They had a son who was also dealing with leukemia, and his little brother was somebody that I would babysit in the hospital while we were all there. And those are the things I remember. I don't remember a lot about my dad, but I know that I felt his absence after he passed away. And then throughout my life, I've had periods of times where I really felt his absence. Middle school was a big one. When I first went into high school and when I first went into college, it's like these big transitions. I would feel that hole. And after he passed away, I don't remember logically thinking, oh, this is death. But I do remember feeling like I need to be strong. And I need to be somebody that has it together and can hold it together. Especially
I'm the older sister.
For my mom. Yeah. And I was the older sister, and I don't know if that was my wiring or what led to that, but I knew that I had this sense of, I'm going to be somebody that people can lean on and can count on. I need to be the strong one, and I'm going to be the rock here. And that's kind of been a theme in my life, is be the rock.
Yes, you are. And be in control.
I think having, loving control and wanting to have things organized and managed stemmed from that time in my life when things probably felt a little chaotic to a young kid. At the same time, so I was 7, and in the years after that, I was also struggling to figure out who I was. And I really struggled with my sexuality. When I was a little kid, I didn't have language for what being gay was, but I knew that I was a little bit different from other kids. Mm-hmm. You just have this knowing.
How old were you when you felt that?
I think I was around 9.
Okay.
I think I was around 3rd or 4th grade where I first started to feel like I'm a little bit different. And I'm not sure why.
I'm not like the other girls.
I just didn't know why, but I did have a knowing. I really wasn't interested in boys. I was much more interested in my friendships with my girlfriends. Mm-hmm. And I don't know really what it is. It's just sort of a knowing that you're different.
Yeah.
And then, fast forward a couple years, you go through elementary school and then you get into middle school. And this was the 90s. So people were slinging around the insult, "Oh, you're so gay. Oh, that's so gay. You're so gay." And it's in music. It was in pop culture. It was a very popular insult to throw around.
It was.
And I knew that was a bad thing, but I also knew that for some reason it was applying to me.
You did.
It was like, I knew that I shouldn't be that, but I was like, am I that? Like, you're starting to kind of...
And nobody was talking about it.
Nobody was talking about it. It wasn't a part of the conversation like, hey, this sexuality is a spectrum.
Yeah.
That was not a conversation in the 90s. Also, I was like hanging out with all my friends at youth group on Wednesday nights.
Yeah.
And we went to a Christian church, and youth group was a really fun social activity that I actually loved.
Yeah.
But I was also starting to learn that gay was a thing that you did not want to be, because it was a sin, it was immoral. And not only was it a bad thing, that person was bad. And I didn't want to be bad. It wasn't something that I could make right, because I was the thing that was bad if I were gay.
Right.
And that was a really tricky thing to navigate as a 6th, 7th, 8th grader, because I still didn't really have the correct language, and I still didn't know for sure what I was, my identity or my label, or I didn't even know that you had an option to not have a label and you could just be a human. And so that was something where I thought, okay, I'm this thing that maybe isn't great, so I need to make up for it in other ways. And I think that was sort of the beginning of me putting out an external self that I felt like had to be kind of controlled and perfect. So that I could avoid being seen as who I really was. I could hide that like bad attribute about myself.
Yep. So this all led you to put out this facade.
Yeah.
And this like person that everybody perceived a certain way.
Yes. And
in a good light.
Yeah.
Because you felt like you had to.
I felt like that was my defense.
Yeah.
I recently heard one of my favorite authors, Jedediah Jenkins, he gave this analogy about being human. And he says, being human is like working the knobs on a mixing board. So a mixing board is in a recording studio, and you've got like 100 knobs, right? And like little things that you push up and you push down and you twist, and you're just kind of always trying to equalize the sound, right? Yeah. And this is such a great analogy for me, because I remember thinking, okay, if I'm gay and this gay knob is turned all the way up, that's like a kind of a scary thing, like a no-no. Like I don't want that to be seen. So I got to turn up all these other knobs. So I'm going to turn up, straight A's. I'm going to get straight A's. I'm going to crank up school and just pump that way up. And then I'm going to pump up sports, because I'm going to be really good at sports. And then I'm going to turn up charm, and I'm going to turn up, the ability to sort of be fluid within friend groups. I'm going to be a chameleon. So I turned that way up so that I could fit in. And, I'm going to turn down the boyish tendencies that I had. I'm going to turn down my, the way that I dress. Mm-hmm. I'm not going to wear the backwards hats like I wanted to, or, the boys' shorts or whatnot. So turn those down, turn this other stuff up. And you're always kind of just like messing around with the knobs a little bit, trying to fit in. And that just, to me, that makes so much sense. And that's exactly what I was doing, is turning up that good stuff, so that people would not know.
Yeah. So that's a lot of perfectionism right there.
It's a lot of perfectionism.
Holding all those knobs and holding yourself accountable into the standard for all these things that weren't even really you.
They were me, but they were only the parts that I wanted people to see. And the other parts I worked so hard at keeping hidden. I didn't talk about relationships too much, but I talked about them enough with people. I, was able to be really personable. I asked a lot of questions about other people. I really was a good listener, but I didn't talk a lot about what was truly going on, about my romantic life or, intimacy. I could talk for days about other topics, but I kept that very hidden away. And that takes a hell of a lot of energy.
Yeah.
So, all through high school, even all through college, I did this. I had a fear. I had a lot of internalized messages about what it was to be gay. I hadn't had a lot of positive conversations about it. I didn't have role models. I didn't know anybody who was openly gay. I would see things on TV at times, especially as we progressed into the 2000s. And, there were those revolutionary sitcoms like Will and Grace. There was a character on the OC. All of these things that I would see on mainstream media and television, I grasped onto those. I was like, this is a lifeline. Like, these people, okay, this is like living normal life. Even though it's on TV, that's a possibility. There's some context.
You had some stories to go off of that made you feel normal.
And like, it was possible for me if in fact I was
true.
gay.
Yeah. Well, and that's why it's so important that you tell your story, right? So that other people can see themselves in you and normalize it, right?
Well, yeah. And, I think if I had maybe known people or heard stories or had somebody speak to me about this, would that have helped me feel like I had permission to do that? Yeah, so when I finally decided to come out, I was 30 years old, and I remember when I came out to you, I remember you
so well.
I sent you an email.
Yes, you did. You sent me an email. I was sitting in my bedroom and I opened it up and it said, I have something to tell you. And I'm like, what do you have to tell me? And I read 2 more sentences and picked up the phone and called you. And
I mean, coming out,
so sweet.
Coming out is such a weird thing because you have to tell people this thing about you.
Right. It was like this big, long explanation. And I'm like, cool.
I know.
It's good.
I mean, by the time I finally came out being 30 years old, I felt like I had some explaining to do, which is so crazy. But I was sending emails. I was going to coffee telling people. I was, meeting people. And, just the whole process is just...
Yeah, you're like, don't set me up with any more men. I don't like them.
Yeah, it's just an exhausting process. And really like one of the hardest things that I think I've ever done. And for any queer person, any LGBTQ community member is really one of the hardest things that they will ever do in their life. And if somebody confides in you their truth, that is such an honor, because it's really one of the things that we try to keep hidden with the most energy in our lives.
Yeah. So it says, I trust you enough.
I mean, it's the thing that you try to keep hidden your whole life. So it is, I hope that allies view that as an honor, because it's a really, really difficult thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, I know that I felt really honored when you told me, and I knew how hard it was for you.
Yeah.
And it is, you just want to hold that space for somebody in their process, right?
And it certainly is a process that, I think before I came out, my coming out was going to be a day. It was going to be a thing that I did.
Yeah.
And what I've learned in the years after that is that coming out is a process that is ever going. I unravel more and more of my old self every single day.
Yeah. So tell us about that unraveling that you've done and continue to do.
I know for myself, my personal experience is that there were so many internalized messages that from religion and what I'd seen in media and what I'd read and what I'd heard from people in my life that really influenced how I viewed being a gay person. And to come out, I couldn't even immediately say that I was gay out loud. Even though that was the purpose of my coming out, I still had this resistance and this knee-jerk reaction to hide, cover up, go back to being very in control.
You didn't identify with it necessarily.
I did identify, but I couldn't get myself to completely be open and vulnerable yet. And that's been the process, is to slowly allow myself to be exactly who I was born to be without apology and without having to explain and write an email. And, you know, a couple of things that have really helped. First of all, being a Chinese medical practitioner, working with patients in the last 10 years, that's been so helpful, just to hear stories about the human condition and the human struggle and how there are so many universal themes out there. And even though nobody has the same exact circumstances in their life,
it feels so similar.
We deal with the same types of struggle and emotion. And that has been incredibly healing, is to show up for somebody in their struggle and allow it to be a part of my healing as well.
Yeah. Well, and we feel so honored when people trust us with their struggle, right? Like that's one of the biggest things that we say to each other all day long is, I can't believe how much people are willing to share with us and how vulnerable they are and how hard life is for people.
Yeah. And that's what suffering does. Mm-hmm. You know, you gain this tremendous empathy for other people, and it's just it's incredible perspective.
Yeah.
And it just allows you to show up in that space with more compassion and more empathy. Another thing that's been so helpful is teaching fitness. That was something I kind of fell into, and I'm so happy that I did, because I teach spin. So you're on a stage with a microphone in front of 50 people, and talk about being seen and being vulnerable. That was such a test for me. Oh my gosh. In the beginning, I was terrible. Like when I first started teaching spin, I was absolutely terrible. And I realized it was because I was still all buttoned up and all in control.
Coming out of your shell.
Well, and the way that I was presenting myself up there on the stage as an instructor, I was just like very in control. And, you know, it was like there was this wall between myself and clients. And what I realized is that's not inspiring to people. Like, people want to see you and want to see your heart and your personality. And as soon as I started speaking a little more authentically and playing the music that I like and dancing around and showing my personality, it changed the game, and I started to do a little better.
Yeah. You just loosened up and had fun with it and could really be you.
That was a big lesson. And I still continue to learn this lesson, because I have sometimes that reaction to go back to old ways of like keeping things buttoned up. But it's a continual lesson to me that people are inspired by seeing your heart. Mm-hmm. People are inspired by authenticity.
Yes, they are.
And vulnerability and humanity. And when you hide that, you put a wall up between you and that other person. And it's really hard. You miss out on that true connection.
So is that why it's so important for you to tell your story?
It is incredibly important, not only to tell my story, and I do try to tell my story more and more nowadays, because I think that if I were a young kid and I had access to people who were in my situation, or I was able to hear some of these stories, I would have felt emboldened to be able to tell mine and to live my truth and to come out.
Yeah.
And not that I mean, look, I don't regret that I didn't come out earlier, because I think that all of our experiences shape us in the way that we are meant to be shaped and put us on the path we are meant to be on. So I don't have any regrets about that, but I do want to be a voice of encouragement for people who are maybe similar to me or who are afraid of being seen, because I have never felt so free as I do now, being able to be open and really being able to not have to have that external self up anymore.
Yeah.
And not have that draining my energy.
Breaking down some of these barriers.
It's just
these tendencies.
Pure freedom. And with freedom comes inspiration and creativity and a stronger voice. I feel like I've been able to find my voice in the last 8 years, whereas before there were a lot of things that I kept inside and didn't say.
Yeah.
So it's a huge motivation to create OptimizeYou, to put energy into creating courses like Surviving to Thriving. I want people to see that they have the ability to step into their power. Like I felt like I was able to step into mine finally, even though it took me a long time.
You did it. It didn't
a long
take
time,
you that
and a lot of it
long.
was through email.
And you have so much life in front of you to be walking in your truth and breaking down these barriers. I know that your story is going to help our listeners so much.
Yeah. And also as soon as I took that leap, things in my life started to move.
Yeah.
And
they sure did.
I started to meet people who were like truly heart-filling. And like we had the same sort of like set point, people who I shared similar values with and who were inspiring. And I was able to fall in love and feel that emotion in my life. So I'm just so grateful for that.
Well, we're all grateful for you.
Lots of vulnerability.
Yeah.